Well, my clock says 7 now. So Dawn is not coming, so I'm chairing the meeting tonight. So Patty, can you go ahead and take roll call?
Yes, sir. Dawn Span has been excused. Ronald Bisson.
Present.
Larry Brand.
Present.
Scott Libby.
Present.
Joshua Spooner. Bruce Benoit. I don't have Mr. Span, Mr. Spooner, or Mr. Benoit present.
Josh is here. He's on mute.
Thank you.
Or at least his name is here.
Present.
Scott Libby.
Present.
Joshua Spooner. Bruce Benoit.
I am present. Sorry, I was having technical difficulties. I'm on an older computer this evening.
Ah.
Sorry about that.
All right. So we do have a quorum. Let's move forward with the approval of minutes. I guess the first one up is the October 6th minutes, which were tabled at our last meeting to review the video. And I saw this afternoon that Josh, you sent some updates. And Patty, Bruce has shown up. You haven't seen him on your screen yet. Hello, Bruce.
Hey,
So first up, the October 6th minutes. Any comments, motions?
Yeah, so earlier today I did circulate some proposed changes to the minutes. Have members had a chance to look at those, or do I need to read them, or how would you like to proceed?
I'm not sure about others. I just had a chance while waiting to get on this call to take a look at them. I myself am okay with the edits, Josh, that you put in for what you said. You know, I think it's a little more detailed than we typically have in there. I would say that we probably don't need to edit the paragraph about Mr. Enrico, where you said Mr. Enrico suggested. I think that paragraph just is saying what he said. So I don't think we have to say suggested anything. I mean, he said it.
Scott.
Yeah.
I put Josh's on, but it wouldn't, all it did was told me who was there, and then it went blank. I didn't get the edits.
Okay. Well, it sounds, and I'm not sure, I guess the other question is Bruce or Larry or Ron, have you guys seen them or had a chance to look at them yet?
I haven't had a chance yet.
Okay. Larry?
I did get a chance to look at them. Yeah, I don't have a major problem with the edits. I do agree with you though, Scott, about that paragraph.
Bruce, have you had a chance to look at them?
No, Josh, I'm sorry. I'm navigating more different things, trying to come up with that particular item. What's the purpose of the edits?
The purpose of the edits is to clarify the minutes. So at one point it says Tim Bryan asked for an answer to Mr. Spooner's earlier question, and I wanted to make sure that my earlier question was reflected in the minutes. So rather than have it described by Mr. Bryant, I wanted it to be provided for in the minutes. And I agree that the minutes are seemingly more detailed than they used to be, although they're also more of a dialogue about what various people said rather than just the meat and bones of what was important. But in any event, because there's a reference to a question that I asked, I thought it'd be best to reflect it. And then there was another change to make it clear that the point that I had made before we voted was that, in my opinion, that the project would have no adverse or negative impact on the neighborhood based on the traffic drawn to the area by the project. So I wanted that to be clarified as well.
Yeah, and I guess my only other, in the scanning, I saw Andrew give advice that the existing minutes appear adequate to him, and I guess I just want to hear what his thoughts are on Josh's edits. You know,
When I reviewed the video, I just looked at Patty's words and kind of followed the dialogue in the video. They seemed to line up. I didn't like scan the video for the clarity that I think Josh is trying to achieve with his edits. From my perspective, I think it's relatively inconsequential which choice you go with. We have a recording, and that's the truest form of documentation of the meeting. So I think if there was any sort of legal issue or challenge, we've got a good archival, copy that we can always refer to.
all right, and just so I can weigh in finally quick. Thank you, Andrew. That was very helpful. Josh, you consider your edits to be a more accurate representation of what was happening there, and certainly not conflicting with the video in any way, right? I know the answer, but I'm just asking.
That's right.
Okay, then I'm fine with them as modified, as suggested modified by our acting chair, Scott.
And I think to Scott's point about the paragraph about what Mr. Rico said, I'm fine leaving it the way it was. So it would read, "It is the obligation of the applicant to address these," as opposed to
Okay.
my edits.
All right. Patty, you had a question. You're on mute though.
Would Josh send them to me again, because they didn't come through, and I need to know what they asked so that I can change them in.
Absolutely.
Thank
All
you.
right, and he'll even take out the edits to that one paragraph that he
Yes, I will.
noted. So it'll be all set, Patty.
Right.
All right, and do we have a motion?
I move that we adopt the minutes as written with the exception of the edits proposed by member Spooner.
I'll second it.
All right, all in favor? Aye.
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 Okay.
Opposed? All right. Now take up the minutes from October 20th meeting. Any discussion or motion on those minutes?
I move that we adopt those minutes of October 20 as provided.
Do you have a second?
I'll second it.
All right, moved, seconded. All in favor? Say aye.
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 Opposed? All right, it's unanimous, Patty. And
I got
an
one.
abstention
Bruce,
from Bruce.
thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, moving on, we'll open up the public hearing for the blasting at 462 Catance Road, R10 033 blasting permit. I think we have a couple of folks who's going to be speaking, either Tyler or Brett, to introduce their blasting in the project.
God, I can do a brief introduction real quick.
Okay.
This is a blasting permit. You guys are required to review and approve blasting permits that are submitted over a certain threshold. That threshold is 300 cubic yards. This proposed project is the development of a single family home, and the property needs to be blasted in order to excavate the foundation and do some site work. I believe the total volume is 700 cubic yards. So this does fall under your purview. We lean on Tom Lister, who reviews the smaller blasting permits for the review of this application. He believes that the project meets the standards, but he did note that there's only one house in the general vicinity of this site, and it's just outside of the 250 foot boundary. He would suggest that if the board was inclined to extend or ask the applicant to extend the pre-survey or pre-blast survey requirements to that structure if they were interested in doing it. The applicant as well as the blaster here to answer any specific technical questions you might have about the project.
All right, thank you, Andrew. Brad or Tyler, did you want to say anything before we open up discussion for the board as far as the project and maybe specifically about the pre-blast or well survey or potential survey for the 476 Catans Road property?
Yes, this is Brett with Main Drilling. We actually have completed a pre-blast survey on that residence where it was so close. So it has been completed, and we did a water test as well. So we already have that covered where it was so close.
Good to hear. Thanks. And I guess I'll open it up to the board then if any questions folks have. My primary question was what I've already asked. I guess the only other one is if we approve this, when do you guys plan to start do the blasting soon?
Yeah, we're hoping for around next Wednesday, the 11th of November, to begin blasting.
Okay. Bruce, you got any questions?
No, I do not.
Larry?
No, I do not. I just note though, next Wednesday is a holiday, I believe. You blast on holidays?
Yeah, the Veterans Day is not one of the legal holidays that is included in our ordinance for blasting. There are a number of holidays that are.
Yeah, it's not actually in there for whatever reason.
Yeah, no, it's just New Year's, Memorial Day, July 4th, Labor Day, Thanksgiving, and Christmas.
Yep.
Hopefully it'll be done by Thanksgiving.
Yes, it will be.
Ron,
No other questions.
Ron, did you have any?
No, I'm all set. Looks good.
Okay. And Josh, since your picture's not up here, you kind of by default end up getting asked last. Sorry about that, Josh.
I don't mind being last.
Okay.
And on this computer, I have no choice. I can't actually make my picture appear. So I have no comments.
Okay. All right. Do we have, oh, actually, I got to open this up to public hearing. So I will open it up to public comment to see, we have a couple of attendees out there. I'm not sure. I don't see any hands up.
Don't see any raised hands, Scott.
All right. All right, I will close the public hearing. Any other comments from the board or motions to be made?
Yeah, I'll go for it, Scott.
All
Give it a
right.
shot. I move that the drilling, blasting, rock specialist blasting permit application is in compliance with the standards of the Topsham blasting ordinance in chapter 85 as set forth. Based on the findings set forth in the memo from Andrew to the planning board dated October 27th on pages 1 through 3. And based upon the following conditions of approval set forth at items 1 through 5 through 6 as set forth on pages 3 and 4 of said memo.
Do we have a second?
I'll second that.
All right. Any further discussion? Seeing
Yeah, I
none.
got one.
Oh,
I got one, Scott.
yeah.
When Bruce said, he said drilling and blasting specialist, it's not drilling and blasting specialist, it's main drilling and blasting.
Excellent catch.
So I would consider that a friendly amendment to my original motion.
Yes, and we have that motion in the second. Any further comments? Seeing none, all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
I
Opposed? It is unanimous, Patty. All right, you're all set, guys. Good luck.
Thank you.
All right. And this next item, I guess it's not a workshop, we're just having a discussion during the meeting, is to discuss potential ordinance amendments that we may want to work on for the 2021 town meeting, which hopefully will be in May. We must have set that date. Now that we're good at doing it at the Topsham Fairgrounds, we can probably keep that date, regardless of conditions by May. Andrew, did you want to go through the, or Rod, either of you go through the memo you sent us? Kind of lay the groundwork?
Andrew will jump in.
Yeah. So yeah, I don't believe the town meeting date has actually been affirmed. I think we're just perhaps being hopeful with our language there in the memo. Regardless, it's kind of that time of the year to start working on these types of amendment projects. Our memo outlined a handful of potential ideas, but we're happy to discuss other concepts that you guys have. I'll just briefly go through them and summarize them briefly for the public's benefit, but also for to kind of refresh your memories. The first is revisions to the use table. In short, not all of the uses that we have defined and that are in that table have all the blanks filled in. There are a bunch of uses, some of which are a little bit more controversial than others that don't have an indication one way or the other. The way that the interpretation goes for these uses is that the CEO believes that they're permissible if they are not filled in. So this might be an omission that we want to fill in and correct to provide guidance to applicants as to whether or not their uses are permissible in these areas or not. A second option would be conditional use reform. So not all communities in Maine have conditional uses. It's certainly very possible for us to revise the status of each of our uses to eliminate a whole classification of conditional uses. As you all are very aware, our conditional use standards are somewhat ambiguous, certainly very subjective. They reference the comprehensive plan, which is oftentimes not as specific as we'd all prefer to be when it comes to language. Those are all reasons that we might want to adjust the conditional use process. We could also just revise the conditional use standards. So keep them all as they are indicated in the table, but just revise those more subjective standards into more objective criteria. In general, our use table and the allowable uses that we have defined in our ordinance are highly specific. The next potential project would be a recategorization of uses. So instead of having very narrow uses on our use table, we might follow a more general category-like scheme. And in my memo, we reference the way that our parking generation table is laid out. It's just kind of based on some more broad use categories. So instead of being very specific and saying a single family detached dwelling unit, it might just be residential uses of a certain density. For commercial types of situations, instead of having perhaps 3 or 4 different types of restaurants, there would be food establishments, and maybe there's slight variations, but for the most part, those are the types of uses that you'd see in the use table. Another potential project actually relates to the application that we reviewed tonight, and that would be an adjustment of the threshold for blasting permits. As you guys are aware, a couple of times a year, we get these situations where there's kind of a one-off need to blast a site, and it's greater than what Tom Lister can review and approve. I'm not sure if it's really the best uses of the planning board's time to facilitate a review of this type of application. Maybe it's just something that you abdicate and provide to Tom. Certainly an annual blasting permit, something like that we grant to Crooker for their quarry, probably is something that the planning board should retain for that purpose. And then the final other suggestion that we have in the memo is related to the Village Center zoning district, and as well as the Main Street plan that we discussed during the Aroma Joe's proposal. Based on your interpretation of the comprehensive plan, there is guidance that kind of suggests that we should at least review this issue of drive-throughs and their permissibility within kind of the central, kind of more downtown-oriented areas of the community. So those are the list of things that we came up with. We're not aware of any applicant-driven projects this season, other than the ongoing efforts by Crooker that we're aware of about the River Road properties. So Rod and I are happy to answer any questions that you might have.
I mean, for me, now, since I'm chairing, I'm going to go first. I mean, it seems like those first three bullets we can mold into something. I don't know what it is yet. I'm really not sure about what the recategorization of uses ends up looking like. Part of me feels like, yeah, we are pretty specific and it might be nice to get to more general uses, but then part of me thinks that that ends up getting into that the whole reason we're bringing this up is to get away from, the conditional use that is kind of wishy-washy. Won't we fall into that same kind of quagmire with relatively general use categories? Maybe I'm not fully understanding where it goes, but it just seems like there is the potential for maybe too much wiggle room, shoehorning some specific use into a more general use to fit into that category. Maybe I'm missing the point with it. Are there other examples of like towns that use that?
Rod, you want to?
Yeah, I'm trying to share what's in our code under the parking standards. That is what a lot of towns are kind of moving towards. The category are general categories like residential, and in that it's more clearly defined about the subcategory of that or the subset of that. So let me take a second to share the screen. Sorry about that. Share the screen really quick so you get an idea of what it looks like. Bear with me. And this again is in our code, but it's not, it was something that wasn't completely flushed out by the, and what I mean by that, it's not all that thorough compared to what we could spend time doing with the board. Let me share. So for instance, can you guys see this here?
Yeah.
Yes.
So it does, as we go through the use, would kind of identify, pretty specific things, but not down to fast food versus restaurant versus food processing versus, funny enough, we have food processing and retail here. What we're doing is categorizing each use. And then what you say when you don't have the use, Scott, let's say it's industrial or warehousing. And if a similar use comes in, you say, well, it's similar to that category. So we don't need to spend a year, which Topsham has done in the past, to identify, for instance, seasonal retail sales. So we plucked from our use table to put those things in because they actually have a place in our, current code. I would actually start, seeing which ones we don't really need and that are very similar to other uses that have the same impact and function as other uses. So, I guess that's the thinking behind that, is to simplify this. In the thought of the ambiguity of conditional standards, hopefully there's, when you come up with a categorization like this, it makes sense to uses similar to or that fall within a certain category if it's not identified and you treat it as such.
But for instance, with where you were showing, you have adult entertainment and I can't, you took it up, so I'm missing it, but
I can share it again. Yeah, hold on.
golf course, there are uses underneath those general categories that wouldn't necessarily fall into the same zone. Like, a restaurant and a golf course, maybe not necessarily, well, you'd have one next to each other, or adult entertainment and a golf course, or maybe more specifically, lodging, a campground and a hotel, probably would not necessarily, like a hotel might be in the MUC, MUL area, where campground might end up being, out in R2, R3, I mean. So that's what I understand grouping them, but then how do you apply those to where they're applicable to,
well, I mean, it's more for, I mean, you still have your use table and you still identify.
Oh, so this is just for the conditional part?
No. I mean, this would be the use table, but what you would do is identify where things are allowed. You don't get rid of campground, hotel, motel, inn, or you separate hotel, motel. I mean, however you would want to do it. It's really for some new use that is not in your use table, which is outright prohibited typically if it's not in your use table. And that, I guess
So
from past experience in Topsham, it takes over a year to get something in front of town meeting to then allow it in town and identify where it goes. Whereas if it's fairly simple, honestly, I'm thinking of this use here, which was set up for Maine harvest. And it so aligns with manufacturing, even by where it's allowed. Just light manufacturing, it's such a specific identified use that it gets a bit bizarre, but.
So you're saying really what you're adding to the use table is these larger categories. The specific uses are still falling under them, but if say a use comes that would fall under industrial warehouse, that's not those that are listed there, it could be applied to there without having to go through the process. So you're essentially adding a new column of generalized categories to the use table.
As interpreted by the planning board.
Yeah.
I mean, I would say that if you're trying to shoehorn in a use under a category, that would be vetted by the board.
Yeah.
That's the hardest part with use tables. You're not going to identify every potential use that you could put a definition to and then regulate in some manner.
Mm-hmm.
This categorization and listing here was simply to come up with minimum parking standards for uses.
Yeah.
Again, that gets into some detailed, but also aligns with industry standards to some degree.
Yeah.
That again, in all honesty, it is not the most pressing need for the town to address.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the use table as we use it, and perhaps we get a bit more sophisticated than what I just showed you too. The code officer is the guy who uses the use table most often, and interprets the use table. I should mention that. It is difficult when, just look between fast food and then regular restaurant. Just the difference between those two. If you ask Tom about the definition on both of those, you'll get a very frustrated response from him about how that gets interpreted,
Mm-hmm.
and how you enforce, is it do they mean counter serve? It's a packaged food. Is every coffee shop then a fast food place? And
then conceptually, is there really any demonstrable difference in impact, which is assumedly kind of what the whole zoning scheme is trying to avoid, is impact. Is there really a difference between these two very minor changes in definition of type of restaurant? Not really. We probably could regulate them the same. I
guess it's part of that bullet on the memo is really a chance to clean things up a little bit as well.
Mm-hmm.
So if we're going to be looking at uses, and that's another bullet because there's blank spaces we brought to town meeting a few years back. It's having that discussion with the board about how you want to address these things, and we can make an attempt to do a bit different use table than what we currently have, or we can stay the same, and either way.
Mhm. Well, others have comments on the revisiting the use table and conditional use? Bruce?
Yeah, I have some comments on the memo overall. I mean, first of all, I get what you're doing with what you were just explaining, Rob. It's more like, which of these things is just like the other kind of game. And you're going category, and the word that's not there is including, and then you all that. So it's the superset is the category, and then you have representative examples, and it would have a potential benefit to a applicant that doesn't fit in one of those specific uses and make us more nimble and all those kinds of things. And I do think it's a different, I hear what you're saying, Scott, about, it's still not 100% defined, but it's a different kind of definition. It's like, which of these things is most likely the other, as opposed to what's consistent with the comprehensive plan. That kind of, those are two different levels of vagueness, if you will.
Mhm.
But overall, if it's not, I'm not interested in scholarly exercises. I'm not interested in, I used to be years ago, but now I'm like, okay, we're solving problems. If this isn't an existing problem that planning staff doesn't think is going to benefit a lot of people right now, I'm interested in pursuing it. And so overall, when you look at all these things that are listed there, where did they come from? I assume they came from planning and code enforcement observations of things that should be cleaned up. And what I'd like to know is what's the top 1, 2, or 3 that the planning staff, I'm very accustomed to relying on technical experts in my day job. And so that's the first thing I'd like to know. Which one of these does people think that is the most burning thing that would help the most people and make the code fairer to people and more? So that would be my question before I decided which one to launch off into.
Well, there is a need on the blank spaces in the use table. We were looking at kind of the efficiency of, we could take this opportunity to do the categorization, of that table. That's not a monument, that's not a huge lift.
It's an outlining exercise that, and I'm thinking of the three of you, like you, Tom, add Tom to you two, and you go through it. Yep. And if I heard that here's a categorization table that takes out the blanks and we think it's logical and we could review that, I'd be willing to do it. I'd be willing to look at that.
It's something that we could, I think, fairly easily pull together. And if it's not fairly easy for us to do, then we will let you know that too. But one of the discussions will be identifying the blank spots and looking back at what we did a couple of years back and retooling that, and preparing it for town meeting. If you want to, again, that's, that one's been sitting for years now, unidentified for some years, and then identified and attempted to fix.
Let me be.
But the only reason I mentioned, so those are two things that can be done at once. Those are one and the same in my mind.
And is that one of the things that drives Tom the craziest? I guess that's what I'm.
Yeah, because I think in that, what we'd do with that too, that it wasn't stated necessarily in the memo, is we would also change some of the definitions, that if we're getting rid of if we don't need to define a micro use, if you will, then that then doesn't need to be in the definition section too. So, but yeah, I think that, I don't know if I'd say drives them crazy, but it always brings up debate, and you guys have dealt with it at your level too, when you're trying to interpret things. The more uses, the more definitions, the messier it perhaps could be.
Right,
In-
oddly enough.
I'm okay with the categorization, you know, the superset with the kind of including and then the list of the specifics, because I think we could come to an agreement, and an applicant would make an argument first to staff that this is where we're trying to do, and it would be vetted through you before it even gets to us, kind of thing. And then we'd hear from staff saying, we think, although not listed specifically, it fits into this category, we agree that as staff, and that would be probably pretty easy for us. But if it's no, the applicant's saying this, we don't agree, then I understand that there's a quasi-judicial and occasionally quasi-legislative role that the planning board has to, you know, has to assume, and that's okay. So I would support that if staff thought it was worth doing. The questions about the conditional use questions are, I agree they need work. You know, I think the last application, I mean, let's put it this way, when Scott and I disagree on something, it always makes me uncomfortable, you know, just because. Yeah, so that just makes me, okay, there must be, we're looking at the same thing, coming to different conclusions, and it happens like once or twice in our careers or something. So just be careful when you go there. I don't think it would be an easy exercise to go down one by one and say what's permitted and what's not, to eradicate that. So maybe a changing of standards based on the impacts of the use as opposed to the compatibility of the use makes more sense to me. In other words, does this use create impacts, whether it be traffic, noise, all the things people want to talk about, usually that are, you know, greatly exceed other compatible uses in the area, you know, stuff like that. That's a different standard than saying is it compatible with the comprehensive plan. So I think that one would require, I'd want to hear more about what other towns are doing, see draft ordinances before you go there. That one's not as easy a lift as it looks. I agree. It may be one of the most important, but it's not the easy lift. And going down through the whole memo, I'm trying to take a look at it now. Just know that if you got down to, you know, the blasting one, that's obvious to me. I'd just like to know from Tom, what is the maximum number of yards of rock you'd have to take out for a residential dwelling?
How about Ron?
You know, well, there you go. You know,
What's a good number for that, Ron? 1,000 yards?
That's what I'm thinking of, 1,000 yards.
Nice round number.
Yeah.
that's a lot of rock for a house, but I'm okay. So yeah, I'd be in favor of that. The drive-through one, that obviously became a critical issue. To me, I tried to say, and didn't make a big deal about minutes on stuff, if drive-through of Joe's had been spilling directly onto Main Street, it would have been a very different issue for me. And up and down the rest of the village things, I might feel similarly. So if you were to prohibit drive-throughs, it would mean drive-throughs spilling directly. You have to make sure that they just don't design a second driveway to avoid that. You know, there was an existing public street that made that analytically different for me. So if we got into that, I just want people to know that's where I'd be on that one. So yeah, I guess what I'd like to, that would be my personal input for further action by staff and us. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
All right. Who are you, Larry? You got anything you want to add to the conversation?
Well, I think the revisions to the use table, I'm concerned that the code enforcement officer thinks that a blank means permissible. So I always interpreted that a blank meant that it was not, but that's a difference of interpretation, obviously. I would mention that the where it says a similar effort was attempted in 2018. That was actually the 2018 amendment was to allow a batch plant in the rural commercial zone. And that was actually a Crooker proposal at that time, was to expand the RCU and have a batch plant in there. And I think that was the one that was failed at that town meeting. I agree with Bruce that I'd sure want to see some more information regarding the conditional use aspect as well as the categorization. You know, if that's something that you know, the staff wants to put together to give us something to mull over or consider, I'm open to that. But I think the primary one is the revisions to the use table, and I'd be in favor of at least X's anywhere there are blanks, because that's always been my interpretation. But that's about it for the moment anyway.
How about you, Ron?
Yeah, I'm all set, right? You know, we've talked about it pretty good and stuff,
Yeah.
but
Josh?
So I think I agree with Bruce in the sense that if the planning staff feels that there are substantial issues that need to be addressed, I'm always willing to be led by the staff in the direction that the staff believes we should be led in order to make necessary corrections to the code. So I don't want to spend lots of time at the planning board level going through the code as planning board members to figure out which changes need to be made and how. I'd far prefer, if we decide something needs to be fixed, that the staff, to the extent it has time to do so, puts together a proposal that we can then review and weigh in on. In terms of the specific areas that have been raised as areas that need to be amended and improved, I don't have, you know, an issue addressing any of them if the staff feels that's what's best. For me, having dealt with the code for a while now, I'm always struck by how many different places the board has the right to waive various provisions. And I've always wanted to try to go through the code and find where those areas exist and try to find a way to
Consolidate.
those provisions, put them in one place with one standard that we can follow on a regular basis. So that's one thing that's always jumped out at me as being frustrating, because I just, you know, I randomly find a reference to a waiver and I wonder, is this the same as some other section of the code where I've seen a waiver exist? So that's one thing I'm interested in looking at.
Yep.
That's it.
Bruce,
Oh, and
you have
Rod, I
your
like
hand
the
up, or you
banjo on
just-
the wall, by the way.
What's that?
Is that a banjo on the wall there?
Oh, yeah. It's just fictitious.
Oh, darn. I was hoping I'd hear something else, like you play.
Oh, it can make noise. Trust me.
All right.
I just wanted to kind of underscore what Josh said about the waivers. It would be great to consolidate even a list of where they all are, write the different standards, and I think that would inevitably lead to consideration of some of those waiver powers should not exist. I think that when we saw them listed all in one place with different standard, my guess is we'd say, really? This? Why? This? Why? This? Why? And so that's an addition to the list of things to do here. I don't expect that would be a quick and easy one, but it would be an important one, because we do set policy that should be consistent every time we grant a waiver. And it leads to literally us going, didn't we 5 years ago do this on that place? And as long as staff never turns over, that'll be fine. You guys will find it for us and tell us, but that's not how the world works. And so it's
It's a complex topic in some ways, and we do go through a lot of granting of waivers. I understand that, but I find them to be, and hopefully we practice a very context-based waiver procedure, meaning, someone comes in and can't meet the landscape standards because the front of their property is all ledge, and we're not going to make them blast to put in the canopy trees or something like that.
we're already densely forested. so that you can't see the activity. I'm thinking of the disc golf place and things like that.
Yeah.
So no, I as I'm comfortable exercising that kind of authority, but it just, I want to make sure it's done.
It's a good point. And that's actually, we're going to add that to the list. Josh, thanks for bringing that one up. I think it's a good one to look at. So there is an even different language on some waiver procedures throughout the code. So that's something that needs to be cleaned up. I guess that's one of the intros to the whole memo. All of these items are really housekeeping. We're not introducing anything new to the town. There's no new use being introduced. There's no, new performance standard being introduced. It's really just cleaning up of what we have.
Right.
I would agree, except for perhaps changing conditional use.
Right.
That would be seen potentially as different. I'm okay with it being different and less subjective if there's a way to do that.
Yeah.
But
yep. That is an overhaul of that one for sure.
That could be a difference, and I'd want to hear things like from other towns, other codes, and God forbid if I say, legal review from somebody that actually says that does the trick and it's not opening a different can of worms that we're not aware of. That
would be a good, final step as we step through that process is the attorney review. If that's what I'm hearing.
That's what you're hearing from me. I don't know if you're hearing it from the board.
All right. Yeah, and just, I still feel we need something with a conditional, whether it is modifying the standards or looking at the uses themselves. I know looking at the uses is going to be difficult decisions, as folks have discussed, and perhaps legal ramifications, as you noted. But it certainly seems like something we've brought up over the years as something that we're frustrated with. So interested to see what changes could be made to the standards themselves that would make it more objective.
Scott, the first edit could just be have the Board of Appeals review every conditional use.
There we go.
Take it away from the planning board.
Yeah. But the other thing is if we do end up looking towards the uses themselves, the conditional uses, and dealing with them, I mean, where's CPIC right now on their implementation? Are they? We can bring them into that conversation.
They'll be coming in to see you folks, I would say, within the next couple of months. They don't want to start on the wrong foot, so they're meeting with town manager, department heads, and all of this, doing kind of a slow move. The staff is introducing zoning implementation stuff for them to be thinking about. So after their meeting in November this month, we will have some guidance on what we're going to pursue over the next year or two, and that's going to be a shift to that character/form-based coding efforts.
Mm-hmm. And how does the use approach fit into that?
So uses are still restricted, and that's one of the misnomers with form-based. You're more concerned, you're less concerned about the use, more concerned of how it fits into where it's going.
Okay.
And my point is that potentially has relevance to the conditional use discussion. What are you trying to make it? Are the impacts, does it feel different? Does the structure look different? Does the amount of traffic look different? does this feel, which you use that kind of thing instead of, that's how I've been interpreting, which Scott has every right and everyone else to say, well, it doesn't say exactly. Is it compatible with the neighborhood? Well, are the impacts, are the uses, are the impacts generated, the externalities of this use, are they similar to other things in the neighborhood? And if the answer is yes, I go, it's compatible with the neighborhood. But that's my particular approach. So that just underscores Scott's point about the need for better definition and objectivity. That's what I would, and this could be because I was, an engineer by original training, and I'm up at DOT, and what you can measure, you can regulate. What you can't measure is harder, and some of them I know you can't, it's a feel thing, but is the building architecture of a nature and scale similar to what, and instead what it's written is it is similar in scale to what was intended in the comprehensive plan. Okay. And then we make a judgment as opposed to which is the difference. Those are two different standards on conditional use, comprehensive plan, neighborhood. And then always one's a wannabe, the other is what's there now. And so I'd just be looking for, to the extent possible, you get to measurable, even not measurable in numbers, not data. That's not what I'm going for. Criteria that it's the intellectual exercise is better defined. Like we were just talking, is this thing more like the other? That's an intellectual exercise that you start from first grade when they give you an apple and a carrot and all that, and a rubber ball, which things go together. Yeah, you start then, and then you go up through all the way through law school, and they're still doing the same thing. Essentially saying what is so.
Yeah. The problem is that a lot of that is subjective as opposed to objective standards. And speaking about law school, Bruce, I think it was Justice Stevens of the Supreme Court had said, I can't define pornography, but I know it when I see it.
Yep.
That's essentially what you're saying as far as how does it fit within the neighborhood, et cetera.
No, I actually wasn't. I actually think that you could say if this use comes in and it's people eating, okay, is that a food establishment? Yeah.
Yeah, the funniest one with that is the breweries and how the state defines a brewery, a tasting room versus a bar, and how they function. It's definitely splitting hairs for sure.
Yes, and it's not easy. So my point is, I actually guess I disagree a little bit, Larry, that it's not a just I feel it's the same. There's a list of things and there's a list of other things, and you say this one fits in that broad category better, which is different than the compatibility with a comprehensive plan, which always has things that can be, the applicant trots out the things that shows it's consistent, and opponents trot out things that show it's inconsistent, and you sit there making a value judgment.
Yeah, I think standards that are identified are objective and have some sort of metric is the way that I would be looking to address
if you can.
Conditional use. Yeah.
And so I guess so I can stop shutting up and keeping this meeting going for any longer, is that I don't care which one the staff bites off first. Scott sounds like he wants to head for the conditional use one first. That will be the hardest and take the longest.
Maybe we need to start it first, get a head start. The blasting one's going to be easy.
The last one's going to be easy. Yeah, it's already.
Can we just do that? 1,000.
I've spoken enough for tonight.
Well, the polls are almost closed, so we got to go see. I'm sure there'll be early returns.
So what we'll do is we'll move on everything that the memo addressed, and we'll bring it back. As Josh had said, there will be some form of first draft proposal to be looking at, or pre-first draft, I guess, something at your next meeting.
Rod, if I may, I don't know if you were being facetious when you said conditional uses would just automatically go to the appeals board, but
I
you
was being
weren't, right?
facetious.
Yes, because
Yeah.
yeah, if anything's going to automatically go, then I'll just say, well, let's just send it there first and not send it to us because I don't want to waste.
Well, when I started in Topsham, that kind of was a practice here for a little bit, where conditional uses would go to the Board of Appeals and then the site plan would go to the. And even in the code, it identifies the planning board as being able to issue the conditional use, and it was. The one, aspect of that, and you guys have dealt with this one where you granted a conditional use for the recreation parking lot, it got appealed and then came back to you. I mean, that's when you have, it is odd to have two boards weighing in on one application in that realm with conditional uses. So, but the appeal process for conditional use is always going to the local Board of Appeals. That's the one thing we wouldn't change.
Sure.
There used to be something called an administrative exception that went to the board.
Oh, we had those in Topsham. Yeah.
All right. I'll entertain another motion.
We adjourn.
Adjourn.
Second. Okay, there's a second. Larry seconded it. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right, it's unanimous. The ayes have it.